Tackling climate change is an act of intergenerational and global solidarity, and the COP process is the only multilateral forum that we have to do so. It is vital that we make this process work. COP has shown that it is able to deliver commitments and agreements, but action is what really counts, and realising the scale of the climate crisis that we are facing, it's difficult not to be disheartened following the conclusion of COP27. The establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund, which will provide financial assistance to developing countries stricken by climate disaster, a measure that was first called for by small island nations some 30 years ago, is a welcome takeaway from the conference. We know that developing countries are the most adversely affected by the impacts of climate change. While we, in the wealthy countries of the global north, are still talking about prospective climate disasters landing on our shores, for many developing countries in the global south, the adverse effects of climate change have already arrived, and with catastrophic effect. We've seen the flooding in Pakistan that has resulted in 1,700 deaths and millions more people being impacted and displaced, not to mention the devastating consequences the floods have had on Pakistan's infrastructure. We've seen a drought in the Horn of Africa that has left 22 million people facing a severe hunger crisis. Climate disaster is already a reality for some of the world's most vulnerable countries, and indeed closer to home, the soaring heatwave experienced across Europe offer a sign of what's to come. The Loss and Damage Fund is a good step, but it must be adequately and fairly funded. We know that Ireland has the finances to contribute more to combating climate change globally than we currently do. Prior to COP27, our party leader, Deputy Batchett, called on the Taoiseach to show leadership and generosity in negotiations, and we echo that sentiment again now that the time has come to act on the commitments that have been made. We must contribute our fair share and take a leading role in holding other wealthy countries to account in contributing theirs. It is difficult to conclude that COP27 has done much otherwise to abate the cynicism the conference has generated in the past about its ability to go beyond agreements and commitments and to deliver real actions and outcomes. The summit's concluding agreement, the Sharm el-Sheikh Implementation Plan, has called on countries to revisit and strengthen 2030 climate targets by the end of 2023 to align with the Paris Agreement, a reminder that this government so desperately needs. However, the agreement failed to advance ambition on the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, despite the fact that under current trends we will overshoot that target by more than 1 degree. The science tells us that we need emissions to peak before 2025, but this is left out of the plan and there is no clear commitment to phasing out fossil fuels. In fact, it more or less ignores the issue. It is extremely disappointing that a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, something that the Labour Party wholeheartedly endorses and indeed called on the government to sign up to prior to the summit, could not be agreed upon. Regrettably, accusations of the COP summits as being all bark and no bite could just as easily be applied to this government's climate action plan. They're big on rhetoric but weak on delivery. Time and time again, they have shown that they are not giving this existential crisis the attention that it warrants. The last climate action plan was delayed significantly and not aligned with the fiscal budget as was promised. Carbon budgets and sectoral emission ceilings were not given proper time for debate before the Dáil rose in July of this year, and the government delivered a ceiling that was below the optimal level for agriculture. A lower ceiling would be fine, except that this government has repeatedly shown itself to be incapable of even meeting its own targets. Just 45% of the 162 measures scheduled for April, May and June of this year were delivered on time, as per the latest Climate Action Plan Progress Report. To date, nearly 25% of the measures promised have been delayed. Moreover, Ireland's emissions actually grew in 2021, even when compared with pre-pandemic levels. The Environmental Protection Agency has concluded that Ireland will be way off the target of 51% reduction in emissions by 2030, and we remain among the highest emitters of greenhouse gases per capita in Europe, 60% above the EU average. Worse still, recent report by the ESRI shows that our real carbon footprint is actually 70% higher than estimated when we account for consumption as well as production. But the government has shown its reluctance to hit the coffers of those making money from overconsumption, as its hesitancy in implementing a windfall tax on energy company profits, a measure that the Labour Party has been calling for since January of this year. So while the government hums and haws about introducing piecemeal climate measures, we in the Labour Party have called for climate action to take centre stage and inform all other policy decisions. Our economy must be climate-proofed, our infrastructure must be climate-proofed, our services must be climate-proofed. We have advocated for meaningful and practical measures that will make a difference. We want greater investment to harness the enormous potential that Ireland has to be a world leader in renewable energy. The influence, that petrostates had on proceedings at COP27 has made headlines, but we want Ireland to be a leading green state at COP summits in years to come, showing other countries that there is an alternative. We want to create a sustainable agricultural sector, which is why we proposed a doubling of the organic farming scheme and capital investment for a new agricultural rooftop solar scheme grant. A just transition means our vital farmers and agricultural workers must also see the benefits. Lastly, we want to change the way we see transport in this country. Minister Ryan recently acknowledged that we need systemic change in our transport system to reduce our reliance on cars, and the Minister is correct. And that is why we proposed a €9 a month climate ticket for unlimited public transport, modelled on the hugely popular German scheme. We've also called for significant investment in modes of clean and active travel through expansions of the Cycle to Work scheme and further rollout and expansion of the City Bike scheme. These are simple measures that would help us to radically cut our emissions, reduce our systemic reliance on cars, and have the added benefit of shielding people from the rising cost of fuel. We should acknowledge the tremendous advocacy that the climate crisis has brought about among young people. We've seen groups of young people like Fridays for Future, among others, protesting outside the Dáil. They understand that because of this generation's inaction, they will be the ones picking up the pieces. One of the key messages to come out of the recent Children and Young People's Assembly on biodiversity loss was that future generations must live in a world where there isn't a crisis and where children don't have to take action because of the incapability of past generations. In years to come, this government's legacy will be judged on its response to the climate emergency. After last year's COP26 summit, the Taoiseach said that climate action is a central tenet of the programme for government, but the government's performance since then has left far too much to be desired. Despite this, we often hear from the government that we're on the right path. Well, now is not the time for a leisurely stroll along the path, it's time for an outright sprint. It is time that this government takes radical and meaningful action. It's time that this government, along with our friends who attended COP27, take the climate crisis seriously and deliver on the promises it has made. Thank you.